So we're delighted to have Dr. Amy Orben join us, who's a research fellow at the University of Cambridge, and whose work focuses on how digital technologies affect adolescent psychological wellbeing and mental health. So warm welcome to you, Amy.
Thanks, Emily. Great. Well, and hello to everyone. So I'll be following up Pete's great presentation and talking a bit more about what we know about screen time and social media use and how that relates to adolescent mental health. I've been researching kind of both screen time and social media use for 5 years now, and have bounced between the two. So parts of this presentation will sometimes be about screen time in general and sometimes about social media use in particular. But a lot of the results are very similar. So I'll highlight if they're different, but if I do switch around, don't kind of get worried about that I'm losing track. So I need to, there. Great. So the kind of putting the last slide to the front, it's the key message is really that things are really complicated, and especially in a crisis like now, there's not really a lot of space to oversimplify things, because the complexity of this also means that we need to react to screen time differently. And this is important because there's been a huge amount of oversimplification over the last couple of years, something that really drove me to do research in this area as well. But you know, we've had Jeremy Hunt, when he was still Minister for Health, saying that social media poses as great a risk to children as obesity. We've had people liken smartphones to hard drugs like cocaine, all linking them to kind of the huge decreases in mental health we've been seeing, and that they've destroyed the generation, more or less. And so this is a really key question, what we actually know about screen time and social media use. And I'll be going kind of synthesizing the literature throughout this short presentation. So the first thing that we know about the link, so the correlation between screen time and adolescent well-being, is that it is negative. Like if I open up any data set, and you would normally find that those teenagers that are reporting more social media use or more screen time than others also on average report lower mental health and well-being measures. That doesn't tell us anything about the causality, something that Pete, you know, really skillfully covered. But that's what has driven a lot of this conversation, because of that oversimplification. And there's two reviews I put here, one from myself and another great one published in January by Candice Odgers and Mikey Jensen, that really go through this, that there is this negative correlation. Very understanding what is driving it. Is it an actual causal effect linking screen time to decrease in mental health? Is it driven by parenting? Is it driven by socioeconomic status? It's a really complex interaction. So that's kind of what we know there at the moment. Crucially, is that that correlation is really, really small. And we often don't really talk about the size of effects. We just want to know whether it's there or not. But it's actually really important to know what is the size of this that we're actually talking about. And that's actually quite difficult to communicate. So a really handy way to think about this is what I've done in a recent paper with Andrew Shabilsky, was to compare the correlation between screen time, so technology use, and well-being, to the correlation of other things in a child's or a teenager's life with well-being. For example, how does being left or right-handed correlate with their well-being, or how does wearing glasses correlate with their well-being? So you see on the graph that the correlation between screen time and well-being is small and negative. So it's negative 0.04 in this graph of UK teenagers. And being left or right-handed doesn't really matter at all. It's near to zero. How tall you are and how much you use a bicycle correlates positively with well-being, but again, in a very small amount, but on the other direction. And wearing glasses correlates negatively with well-being, and even a bit more than technology use. But these are all tiny effects. And the hope is that this kind of metaphor, this framing, will make us kind of reconsider that the size is really important. We don't normally talk about banning glasses, and so this just shows that we need to have a more in-depth conversation about these things and how big the effects actually are. This is especially the case because we don't know the causality. We don't actually know what is driving this correlation in these data sets. And recent evidence really shows that it is really complicated, and the link between something like social media use and life satisfaction is clearly bidirectional. So in a study on, again, a UK sample of teenagers that were studied over 9 years, if a teenager increased their own social media use from their own average in 1 year, that predicted a small decrease in life satisfaction 1 year later. But also if their life satisfaction decreased from their own average in 1 year, that also predicted an increase in social media use. And so this shows us that the kind of effects we're looking at are probably extremely complicated, much more complicated than this kind of circular graph I'm showing on the screen. And that's lastly because, and this is the most important point, is that things are highly individual. And the way I try to explain this normally is through a metaphor of a chocolate bar. So many of us would agree that if you would ask a researcher to explain whether a certain child, your child, or somebody in your school, or somebody who you're treating, how they will react to eating a chocolate bar without any other information about them, that's really, really hard and almost impossible. The researcher would need to know, is that child a diabetic? Because if it is, then eating that chocolate bar could be really, really harmful, even leading on deadly. But if the child has just come off the football pitch or is an athlete, then that might replenish their energy level and be really helpful. And we need to know about the frequency. Are we talking about eating a chocolate bar every minute, or every 10 minutes, every hour, every day? And about the motivations. Does that child want to eat the chocolate bar because they're bored or lonely or sad, or because they're hungry, or because it's their birthday? And so this sort of nuance is really important for when we talk about things like social media use and screen time as well. And that sort of contextual information is just as important. We just don't talk about it yet as much because I think screen time is just newer than diet, for example. We need to think about the type of user, and kids and teenagers are very, very different, and they will be very differently affected by the same type of use. For example, just looking at happy couples on Instagram might have a very positive effect on a teenager that has just found itself in a positive, maybe a first positive romantic relationship, but could be really distressing for one of them that's just gone through a pretty harsh breakup. We cannot go into that detail at the moment, but what we can study is, for example, how different, if males or females react to social media. And this is, again, going back to my longitudinal study. This graph just shows how life satisfaction and different levels of different measures of life satisfaction affect social media use 1 year later. And this is just for teenage girls. You can see that a lot of them are in the negative spectrum, so to the left of the 0 y-axis. But now, so this is again girls, it's now going to transfer to teenage boys, and most of those are non-significant. The kind of confidence intervals overlap with the y-axis. And this shows a really profound gender difference for life satisfaction predicting social media use. And that's the same the other way around. Social media is predicting life satisfaction. This is teenage boys. Again, a lot smaller directional effect, and teenage girls are a lot larger. And actually, gender is only a really small amount. Like there might be other individual differences that are way more important, and we need to look at those in future. Lastly, I wanted to talk about the type of use is also really important to think about. As Pete mentioned, just saying social media use even, it's so diverse that you would really expect different types of use to make a big difference. For example, in the social media literature, there's an idea about active versus passive use. So active use of social media is like chatting to friends, posting on blogs, writing to each other. And that seems to be hypothesized to increase feelings of social connection, and that may be possibly boost well-being, compared to passive use of social media, which is just scrolling through content, not interacting with anyone, which could instead lead to social comparison, envy, anxiety, and therefore decrease in well-being. This has all not been really tested properly, especially in the current social isolation, but is interesting to keep in mind. So my last point is that there is a real lack of evidence. And this has been highlighted by the Chief Medical Officer in their report last year, saying that we really cannot give guidelines yet about how much screen time people should have or how much they use social media, because there is not that evidence there yet, and because it's so highly individual. And they highlight, as Pete also has, the report from the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health, which really says that to understand how a single child or teenager is affected by screens or social media, you need a lot of contextual information. And the people who really have that contextual information are parents, caretakers, and those close to them. And so they should be empowered to make these decisions. While that's not an easy answer, that's probably the best answer that we have at the moment. Great, so it's complicated, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for joining us for this recording from one of our Emerging Minds webinars focused on how we can best support children and young people during this time of COVID-19 and what research can offer us. We are planning a range of webinars and you can find details of those on our website, and please do also get in touch to let us know what subjects are on your mind and what you'd like to focus on next. So a quick word about Emerging Minds. We're a research network funded by UK Research and Innovation, and members come from all sorts of disciplines and sectors, but we're all working towards reducing the prevalence of mental health problems experienced by children and young people. We really invite you to get involved, so please do sign up to keep in touch with our newsletter via our website, or keep in touch on social media, for example, Twitter. We also wanted to talk to you about a survey we are running at the moment called CoSpace. So we want to learn how families are coping with the challenges of COVID-19. So if you're a parent or a carer of a child in the school years from 0, so reception and foundation, to 11 in the UK, please do consider taking part. And your responses will really help us to find out how children, young people and their families are getting on, what's working for them, and how we can best help. Please do also spread the word to your networks and colleagues too. You can see there some of the findings that we've shared so far from the study. And on our website, you can find resources particularly for parents and carers and people that work with children and young people, like the one here on the screen, about supporting children and young people with their worries. Thanks again for listening, and we hope to keep in touch with you. All the best.